Hi, very good morning to you. It's Jim from maverickstar Observatory. Guys, we are about to lose this observatory if there isn't some support put in place for it within the next week. That's how close we are. So I'll mention a link at the end of the video. I wanted to talk to you about what's been going on over it with Palestine and Israel. Before I do, I wanted to talk to you about a film that was done called The 7 Deadly Sins. And it was about a serial killer that was going around killing, but he was using the 7 deadly sins to kill. So for instance, gluttony, he fed a guy up in that film to the point where he died. And in the end, there's a police officer, and the serial killer wants him to kill him so that he can act out the final of the deadly sins, of the 7 deadly sins, which is revenge. And to do that, he kills his wife, cuts the baby out of her and kills her. And the police officer is called to a spot where he believes he's going to find one of the bodies of one of the victims from this serial killer that they've had released from the prison to show him where he's buried the body. Only a UPS van pulls up, a delivery van pulls up with a box, and the police officer opens the box. And the serial killer says, "That's your baby." And obviously, the police officer is struggling with himself to do his job accordingly and use the system of law, or just to take matters into his own hands and commit revenge. And of course, he does do that. Now, if I said to you guys, last week my wife was murdered and the heads of the children were also cut off, and I've killed somebody over the last day who was responsible for that, you would have sympathy for me, I gather, and you would probably have understanding as to why I did that, and probably think that it was justifiable and that no punishment should be put down on me for committing that act of revenge for my wife and my children. And I want to ask you a question here, because there is a point, as always, when I talk about something, there is a point that I'm going to make. Is that, do you believe that we live in a time, in the last 2 decades at least, the last 2 decades, I know it goes back if we go to the War of Tonkin, how that war was started, but do you believe in false flag attacks? And do you believe also that in order for a certain behaviour to be had by a lot of people to persuade them would require a certain level of events? Now, I want to make a statement here. First of all, I have, for what's happened over the last 5 days in Israel, utter condemnness for the acts of violence that we've witnessed. We've seen some pretty atrocious things committed by Hamas, and let's not forget also the acts of horror committed against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip over the last 20-30 years. But nothing justifies the likes of what we saw over the last 5 days. It should never happen. There should always be, a dialogue between two people before they resort to things like they have. My point is this, is that if you go back into the history of Israel, you're going to see that it was the Jews before the Palestinians that owned that land. It was called Judah at that point, and over the years it has exchanged backwards and forth. And of course now Israel were given this land by the British around 1946, just after the Second World War, and then we saw them legally classify it as a state, or illegally, which they did. They classed it as a state. It was accepted by various countries around the world as a state and a country. And of course, since that point in time, Jews from all over around the world have managed to occupy it to the tune of about 7 million at this point in time. Now, you know as well as I know, there's a lot of land which is disputed, and land that has been taken away from Palestinian illegally, which seems to have gone blindfolded against the world's nations in other words, that nobody has done anything about this. Yet we see the double standards of, when we compare this to what Putin is doing with Ukraine. Obviously, in the 80s, before the Soviet Union broke up, Ukraine was part of Russia, the Soviet Union, and of course he wants it back. Well, there is no difference, in my view, with what is taking place here in Israel and Gaza and Palestine. There is no difference whatsoever. The only difference is that United Nations and other Western countries are turning a blind eye to it, and of course it is double standards. It is good for one on one hand and not good for the other on the other. Yet we all condemn what is going on in both of these regions of the world. What is happening in Ukraine, with Russia stealing land off Ukraine, we all sympathise with that, and we should all sympathise with what is happening right now in Israel and in Palestine. Now, the reason why I mentioned the film at the beginning of this is because when we're talking about false flags attacks, if you are, let's say, in the mindset of taking back all of that land in Palestine right now and putting it in the hands of Israel, then you're going to need to do something pretty off the cuff to convince everybody that that is necessary. And of course this is what has happened in my belief. I don't believe that all the world's intelligence agencies sat idly by, asleep, whilst this was being orchestrated. 28 different regions in Israel was attacked 5 days ago, from the land, sea and air, and around 3,000 to 5,000 rockets fired into Israel from the Gaza Strip. This was an organised event that was even brought up. That was, there was a build-up of this, and it was told by the Egyptian authorities. The Egyptian government said, and warned that this was happening and this was building up, and yet everybody sat by and did nothing. Now, if you wanted to make the final land grab in Palestine of the Gaza Strip and the rest of that land and occupy it for the foreseeable future and claim it as yours, then you would need a pretty good story in order to do that, and you'd need to convince the world that it was necessary in order to prevent further atrocities like what we've seen over the last 5 days. I'm just saying that the sacrifice of 1,500 people might just persuade the whole world that your next actions would be acceptable. And this is just me expressing my feelings. Could it be a false flag attack for a further land grab and stealing of more lands? And would that be justified? Would that be enough justification of, the atrocities that we have seen as a result of that attack last Saturday morning when it began? Could be, couldn't it? And of course, I ask the question: do we live in a day where such things happen? If I go back to 9/11. What shortly happened after 9/11 was a war against Iraq. And that was the precursor of that war. It was a revengeful attack on the so-called perpetrators that caused the Twin Towers to come down. And then, we had further justification of weapons of mass destruction, which was never found. We're seeing some double standards here, and it should come as no surprise, because in this day and age, in any case, we always see this. I mean, if we just look at other areas, and set aside, Palestine and Israel to the one side and concentrate on, what is happening with regards to the climate. We seem to have people that make justification for things in order to gain other things. Now, in the United Nations point of view, they have now, on the back of CO2 being the cause of climate change, now managed to raise for themselves £500 billion a year, and that will keep the United Nations afloat for the foreseeable future. It is going to come out of our pockets, mine and yours, and they are changing industry around the world, perhaps for the very, very worst and wrong reasons, but that is nevertheless the case. And we are seeing a suppression of, freedom of thoughts, freedom and concise to share these thoughts, and freedom, of speech, all at the same time. Our world is changing very, very rapidly, and nobody is listening anymore. Nobody seems to be listening, and what we're seeing is, nothing short of corruption on a scale never seen before, and we have never seen human beings sit back so idly and do nothing whilst all this goes on. We know what is happening is wrong, and I don't think any of us support, murderous atrocities on any side of conflict. But what will be the only way of resolving these issues will be when, the atrocities stop and people sit down at a table and discuss things amicably, using logic, and resolve these situations in favour of, both parties. They will inevitably have to come together to end these atrocities from, happening. So both parties need to be heard. Both parties need to sit down and work something out. Otherwise, this escalates. We do live in very dark times right now. I just wanted to share those thoughts with you. I wanted to put a case across where, you would even yourself support, another third party doing something as a revengeful act in order to get some sort of satisfaction back from, feeling like they have lost everything, or they have lost something very significant in such a very cruel and wicked manner. I'd really like to hear your views, obviously over the last few days, because I have been speaking about, what is going to take place over the coming weeks in the Gaza Strip. People have called me, can you believe, an anti-Semite? It's unbelievable. I've got friends that are Jews, and I've even stated that I am was a Freemason, and anyone would know that at the heart of any lodge is the Jewish King Solomon. So it is absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous to even go such down a road as to call me an anti-Semite when I have a lot of friends that are actually Jews, and I absolutely sympathise what we have saw over the last week take place in Israel, and condemn it. I condemn it on both sides, because when innocent people are being killed for, in my view, very obviously an act to get people to behave in such a manner where they want to now go into Gaza Strip, and I think we all know what's going to happen. And can you believe, these people are trapped in that 25-mile strip, over 2.3 million of them, and they've been refused entry into Egypt. On the grand scale of things, 2.3 million people is not a lot of people. Egypt could easily allow that amount of people to not only pass through the border, but put them up until something can be sorted out. They could do that, and other world organisations could assist here, and in doing that we could prevent more atrocities of, look, let's face it, there's always innocence on either side of these things. There is two-sided coin. There will be children in harm's way in Israel, children in harm's way in Palestine, and we should do what we should do to at least give them a chance of life, is all I'm saying. That's my standpoint on this. Getting back to the observatory before we end the video, and I hope that you just don't just switch this off now. We are in need of support. We've gone and we've been warning for the last few months now that this was coming. We don't want to have to take dramatic steps. We're asking for people, those 2,000 people that usually watch this video, to chip in some bucks now, because we are going to start facing some real hard times here at this observatory if we do not do something very soon. We will have to resort to perhaps unusual matters, or resulting in something we don't want to do. Let's put it that way. So we need some support. This is one of the last platforms now that have their own equipment, that relay all the findings back to the people, and to this point in time we've done it for free. The last decade we've done it for free and just relied on donations, and over the time donations have been slowing down. We've lost a couple of the big supporters, maybe by no means of their own. They've not said why they've stopped, but that is entirely up to them. It has never been mandatory, and in any case, so that's where we are. Just want to give you a heads up on that, and mention the link after the video in the description. So I'm interested in your points of view of what you think is going on right now in the Middle East, and by all means give me your views on Ukraine and what's happening with Russia, and of course on any other subject you feel you want to talk about. As always, I always read them comments in the comment section. So at this point I'll just mention the link is there. We need to see a bit more enthusiasm from a few more people. Don't rely on others to push the cart for you. We've all got to do our little bit. So with that, I'll say what I usually do. Links down there. You take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.